Hello and welcome to the Important Bits podcast. Today we're joined by Steve Gattuso. Steve Gattuso is a programmer extraordinaire, but he's also more extraordinaire than that. He does some other things too, and we're going to talk to him about that today. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Fun to be here. Where do we start?
Where do we start? So at first I like to start by asking people about their backgrounds, but we have a lot of shared history together.
Oh God.
One might say, you know what I mean? Like we've been to some places, we've done some things together.
Lived together.
Can you tell us a bit more about our relationship? I would love to hear it from your end.
Oh boy. Did I meet you day one of college?
Day one.
Day one, yeah. Bram runs into my hallway, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, trying to make all these new social connections, all these new friends. I don't remember much about that day one, but ever since that day one, it's just an increasing escalation of just absurdity and trolling each other and just generally, like something's going to happen on this podcast that's going to it's going to culminate.
Guaranteed.
You know, this is like the moment out of all these years of Bram and I knowing each other that my trolling relationship with him is going to culminate in this podcast.
I can't wait, honestly.
Yeah.
It's surprising to me that it's been 7 years. That it's been 7 years since around that time where we just kind of like met, like that first day at school.
2019 minus, yep.
That's how math works. Damn,
that's
man. It's crazy. It's crazy how long we've known each other.
Oh, that's a long time ago. Okay, cool. So I'm old now. We're old now.
We're old.
Cool.
We're old people now.
At the ripe old age of 25.
I'm hitting my quarter life crisis at this moment, so I think that everybody is on this board too. Maybe not. Are you hitting your quarter life crisis?
Nah, man. I peaked in 5th grade.
You peaked in 5th grade?
Yeah, 5th grade.
Tell me more about your peak in 5th grade.
In 5th grade, I invented a currency for my... You know, this is kind of foreshadowing, which we'll get to. I invented a currency in my 5th grade classroom called Roland dollars, because my teacher was named Mrs. Roland. And everyone used Roland dollars. We were all exchanging things. There was this whole mini economy. There was a mint. I peaked there. You know, no business that I ever create in the future will ever be as good as Roland dollars.
So
I was literally printing money.
Are people still using Roland dollars?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not.
That's super unfortunate.
Yeah. It was a maybe 3-month peak, and then it was just all downhill from there.
What is the inflation rate of a Roland dollar?
I mean, at this point, it's a deflationary currency. They're disappearing over time. Therefore, they're becoming more valuable. You know.
What could one buy with a Roland dollar?
Oh, back in the day, it was you could buy some what are those little cars, the mech? Yeah, you could buy some Hot Wheels with it. That was the big trade. It was Roland dollars for Hot Wheels.
Really?
You could buy paper airplanes, like some really elaborate ones, honestly, that I could not reproduce today. Like this 5th grader could easily outdo me in making paper airplanes. That was a big part of the trade. I don't know if there's any illicit trading going on with it. I think it was a mostly wholesome currency.
It was above the ground. There was
mostly above the ground. There's no taxation.
There's no taxation.
No taxation.
Oh, the government wouldn't like to hear about that.
No,
not at all. That's the thing, for sure. So you printed Roland dollars. Was this like a project for your teacher? And that
No. This was just me.
She's like, I want you to make a currency so that I can feel.
I think they stifled it once we started gambling with it, and that just popped in my head. We loved playing blackjack as 5th graders for some unknown reason.
That's impressive.
And as soon as we started gambling with it, I think that's when the teacher shut it down.
That's when they were like, this is going too far.
This is way too far.
Let's introduce the vice principal dollars as well. I don't know.
Yeah, or just stop the kids from gambling, because that's probably not a good habit to start out with.
I mean, you got to start at an early age. You know, the earlier they start, I think the better in these types of situations.
You know, maybe the casino was trying to incept it in my brain just to get them early. You're right.
So, did you always want to become a part of the Fed in terms of like printing your own money?
I foreshadowed, because later in my career, I ended up working in cryptocurrencies, and I was printing money at ICOs or during ICOs, which is
printing money during ICOs.
It's literally what you're doing in an initial coin offering. Is you're printing money, and I mean that money's all garbage, but you're printing it and people are buying it.
So to jump, I guess, into ICOs at this point, I was just like,
maybe we should.
We'll move the clock forward, and then we'll move the clock back, and then we'll kind of build from there. So you worked at an ICO. A lot of people have a lot of questions about cryptocurrency. A lot of people don't really fully understand it as a principle. As someone who's worked in the field,
in the biz.
Can you kind of elaborate on your, I guess, so 2 parts, your feelings on cryptocurrency, but then what is cryptocurrency? So probably not in that order. Do the what is and then
okay. Well, okay, for clarity, what I was working at was we were facilitating initial coin offerings in the United States, which is otherwise an illegal thing to do because of securities regulations. This organization that I was working for was they had a legal framework with which they were selling something called utility tokens, which was in their eyes, not a security, and ideally in the eyes of the government, not a security, and therefore could be sold to consumers. So, what is cryptocurrencies? I think the best way, I'm guessing most people listening to this are familiar with Bitcoin. You can think of cryptocurrencies as digital money. And rather than having some giant national institution back this currency like like the Fed in the United States or the Treasury, in this case you have math and algorithms and a lot of computational power that are securing this currency and making it something that is secure and therefore valuable. People's brains are making it valuable, but the math makes it secure. So if I give you a Bitcoin, then I can't give you that same Bitcoin to someone else. That'd be double spending, and all of a sudden I would have unlimited money if that was the problem.
So it's kind of like a math-based trust system as opposed to a government-backed trust system.
More or less.
So when the government comes in and you were saying with securities and kind of saying like, okay, this type of currency counts as something that we need to trade that's taxable, why did your company believe that what they were trading or printing or whatever you were doing wasn't falling under that
it was taxable. I now the legal and like political parts of it I have less knowledge in, nor do I don't even know how much of it I legally can talk about, because you have to be like a licensed broker dealer or whatever. Long story short, that company is now defunct, so it's not around anymore. But yeah, so I was working in the less so cryptocurrencies but blockchain space for a while. I guess maybe I should give like kind of a progressive where I came from and everything. So obviously went to school with Bram for 4
arduous years.
Yeah. And then when I got out of school, I worked at a startup called Weebly in New York, and I was helping them build. I was basically an email or promotional tool for small businesses. So if you were a small business and wanted a newsletter, then you could use this tool, and rather than having to know how to program and do all this mumbo jumbo, you could just design emails by dragging and dropping and sending them out, which was cool because it helps small businesses grow. And creating newsletters is, for better or worse, a part of that. So I did that for around 8 months, and then I got sick of working full time. I had paid off my student loans at that point, very luckily, and then I decided to take the jump into freelancing, to quit my full-time job and start at the time, an S Corp, and try to start building freelancing and working remotely and technically not having a boss, clients and everything. But so I did that for a couple of years, and we can dive into that at some point too.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're gonna pick these apart. So.
Yeah. After that, I joined a company that was a cryptocurrency company or blockchain company. It's a better word. And I was working for them as a consultant for a while, and they were a client of mine. And then eventually, one of my friends was working there, and he brought me on full time. I really loved the team. I was working with a bunch of smart people. I was learning a ton and continued learning a ton throughout that experience. And then a year later, I decided that industry wasn't quite right for me. I still loved my team, to this day love my team, and talk to them frequently about it. But
is this the same team where the securities thing that we were just talking
about? Yeah. The original team from that company. We shifted and did a bunch of different things throughout our time. And they're still there, and they're working on a new product and everything, which is super cool. But yeah, so I decided the blockchain industry wasn't quite for me, and I decided to leave. And after that, I guess that's what I'm currently doing, the Recurse Center, which is this like programmer's sabbatical here in New York, where you're essentially surrounded by 30 other people who just quit their jobs and don't really know what they want to do, but are really passionate about programming and want to build stuff. So we're all just kind of sitting around in this space, working on these really cool passion projects, whether that be art or, for me, I'm building like a music streaming site. It's a
Can you
remake.
tell us more about that?
Yeah. So it's a remake of this. There used to be this website called Turntable FM, which would let you join a room with a bunch of friends and play music, and everyone could listen to music at the same time. There were a bunch of DJs. Think of it like Pandora, except rather than having algorithms determine what song you're going to hear next, it's a human.
Right.
Which is cool. And some amazing communities came out of this, and it was so much fun. I remember I would go to sleep listening to these rooms. It would be like an ambient electronic chill like room that would have
lo-fi music to study.
Yeah, lo-fi music, and I would listen to it at night. And like if I couldn't sleep, you go into the chat room and just be like, "What up?" So that site died in 2013, and ever since then, my friend and I have always been trying to rebuild it, but making it peer-to-peer, so that it doesn't rely on some.
Peer-to-peer?
So basically, think of like LimeWire or Napster or any of those where everyone is uploading things and sharing content rather than it just being one centralized source. BitTorrent.
Right.
of licensed content, ideally. I mean, I have no control over that, but in the rooms that I play, licensed content or something that you have from friends or something, which also enables you to get some really cool music or surface some really cool music that you wouldn't have otherwise found, because Spotify doesn't have everything.
Right.
So my time at Recurse Center has been spent rebuilding that website and making this decentralized version of it that anyone can spin up a server or a room and start their own turntable FM. So I can start one for my friends and have people hanging out in rooms and listening to stuff.
That's awesome. It sounds like you've had a lot of different like kind of inflection points in your life where you've made a lot of kind of pivots, whether it's from email templating at Weekly to doing freelance and kind of like forging off on your own, and then going into cryptocurrency, and then going into music, kind of like building a site that's based around music. Mm-hmm. What kind of like powers these decisions? Like what kind of drives you from one thing to the next?
I don't know the exact answer to that question, but off the top of my head, it seems to be that I kind of follow these strings of interest and happiness until the string kind of wears off and is less strong, and then I'm like, I'm not really learning here, I'm not really having fun, I'm not enjoying myself, so all right, time to move on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. Or I find some new passion or some new kind of happiness or interest string that's even cooler than the current one, and then hop over onto that one and keep kind of following along with it. That's how I think about it, at least. So yeah, it's just kind of following what interests me. And as an engineer, we're in a pretty fortunate position where it's easier to jump jobs. It's easier to switch around between those things. It's easier to come up with a savings such that you can, do this program that I'm doing, which is, I'm not getting paid this summer, living off of savings here in New York, which is, it's expensive. So yeah, it's been mostly just kind of following interests and happiness.
So following interest and happiness, I guess broadly, it's kind of one of those things that's really hard to unpack, because there's, it's just it's encapsulated by the sentence of follow what you want to do, but at the same time, it's so much deeper than that, because you have to do all these mental heuristics and acrobatics to decide this thing will give me more happiness than the next thing.
And you also have to deal with a lot of things that are kind of sticking you into your current position. Like it's really easy to get stuck in kind of one lane, and it's really hard to jump ship. Like going from working full time to being doing consulting. That was a big gap, because you go from this stable paycheck that you get every 2 weeks to, I don't know, maybe this client will pay me, or maybe I find a client, maybe I won't find a client. Like it's very volatile.
Can you tell us more about that? I think a lot of people are interested in the idea of moving from full time to consulting, but are kind of like afraid to take a leap into consulting because that volatility that you were talking about? Yeah, no,
and the hardest thing, I mean, the first question that I always get from everybody is, how did you find your first client? And I feel like anyone who's done freelancing or consulting, it's hard to answer that question, because it's just so many different ways that can kind of lead you to that first client. For me, I did this fellowship program back in 2013 called Hack and Why. And it was basically a bunch of, my friends and I call it just nerd camp over the summer. You work for a startup, and you're living with 30 other people that are in the same situation, living together in this free housing in New York, which is awesome.
That's a cool program.
But yeah, anyway, so I did that in 2013, and out of that program is a really good alumni network. So a lot of people that are pretty well connected within the tech industry, and so it's pretty easy to find. Like, there's a channel, we have a Slack channel or a Slack team that all of the alumni of this program are on. And there's a freelance channel, and in that channel there are people that are always posting these random freelance gigs or things come up. I had a friend that was just starting out with it was a men's fashion apparel brand. He was building the Shopify website for that, and he needed some help. And so he brought me on board, because he was my mentor during the summer, and he apparently thought I was good enough to bring on for this. And yeah, so that was actually my sophomore year of college. I started doing that and working for this shorts company. At the time, it was just a shorts company.
A shorts company.
Yeah, now they've expanded a lot, which has been amazing to watch them grow. And I still talk to the founder every so often. It's called Oliver's Apparel, but I'm actually wearing their shorts right now.
Are they comfortable shorts?
Yeah, they're great shorts.
Shout out to Oliver's Apparel.
Huge shout out to Oliver's Apparel. They mostly because, I mean, A, it's good stuff, but B, they gave me my start in freelancing.
Right.
He referred me to some people. My other friend referred me to some people. So once you get that first client, if you do a good job, a lot of the times it can snowball, and where you just start getting referrals, friends of friends. I also got lucky knowing someone from college connected me on Twitter, Kyle Ryan, connected me on Twitter with this guy in Rochester that runs a bunch of different companies and needed some development work on this other company that he was working on, which I actually still to this day work on, and years later ended up taking 50-50 ownership with.
Wow.
So it just ended up being a bunch of random connections that got me started, and then from there it was just kind of snowballed into now I have a bunch of people that I could always reach out to if I was ever looking for freelancing or for opportunities to get back into consulting.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of building relationships. How do you keep yourself, well, two things. So I guess motivated would be the first thing, but also kind of like understand what you need to do today versus like what you need to do tomorrow. Because if you're working for Oliver's and another client and client C and D and E and F G, can it get kind of confusing to like keep up with all these different clients?
Yeah, so it's context switching is difficult, where you have to like switch from this client to this client within the day, and you have to like kind of shift your brain to think about all the problems that are happening from one client to another, and organizing all of that is tough. I never had too many problems with it. I don't know if it was like Catholic guilt or whatever that just like stuck with me. I'm no longer Catholic, but I went to Sunday school growing up, and so I don't know if it was the Catholic guilt that kept me working every day, where I felt like if I wasn't working X number of hours, the number of hours I'd agreed upon in these contracts, then oh God, like I'm gonna disappoint this client, or I'm gonna lose them, and everything's gonna go wrong, and I'm gonna lose everything. So like I kept going. So yeah, I think it was maybe fear-based that kept me motivated on certain things, but also like I really enjoyed what I was working on. The projects that I was assigned to were really cool. One was this one company where we were designing software to manage surgical trays. So like the big trays that surgeons have all their instruments in. Apparently that's just a complete shit show in most hospitals. And so I was working with this one guy up in Rochester, and we were starting this company to tame that shit show. And it was really interesting work because it was very, I mean, I was working with this like label printer where I would have to bake these labels in my oven to make sure that they would work on these surgical trays that need to be boiled and sterilized between these surgeries, which just sounds completely like, as a programmer, you just don't think that you would normally be doing weird things like that. Like that's a strange thing.
Yeah. Like making websites is like complete.
Yeah, no. So it wasn't just making websites. It was making like pretty elaborate applications and systems, which was fascinating. Like thinking in terms of systems is a lot of fun for me. And so I was designing a lot of those where I was building. I mean, I specialized in product prototyping. So I was basically pairing up with these people who had funding and an idea, but they didn't have the technical expertise. And I would build out their entire first product prototype with them. So I would build the API, the website, the mobile app. And I was able to do all that because I shared a lot of the same components between those three things. So, which made me really productive as one individual. So that was like my competitive edge with all of these.
Kind of like the building, selling, and being able to see the system.
Yeah. So just I kind of built these tools over time with the help of a friend of mine, Dan Hassan. I actually kind of stole a framework for doing this from him. But that enabled me to have a competitive edge to be able to work on two clients at the same time, and also be able to go through a sales pipeline of I have new clients coming in. I need to make sure that I'm always filling up my availability. So that was really helpful. And the clients that I was working with, they all shared the same sort of code base, or the systems that I were building looked really similar because I was using the same framework. So it was really easy, to answer your question before, it was really easy to context switch between one client to the next within the same day. Because I don't have to completely change my mindset between two completely separate systems. They're actually pretty similar, and you can swap out between them pretty easily.
Was that like a programmatic choice on your end of being like, oh, I'm going to build this with the same language and the same tools, or was that because like the clients themselves were like, we just want to do?
Well, that's the fun thing. So you notice that you said freelancing when we first started, and I kept saying consulting,
right?
And like, so a fun thing is I realized from reading a book called Getting Started in Consulting. I think it's Alan Weiss. That you can actually just like double your rate by just switching from being a freelancer to a consultant.
Interesting. Can you tell us more why?
Yeah. So the difference between the two is a freelancer is, in my eyes, and obviously people can disagree with this, but a freelancer is kind of just a hired gun. So like I have this code base, I need help working on it, so I'm just going to hire this person at an hourly rate to work on this code base to build out these features that I need built. Whereas the consulting thing, the business that I started that way, and that's a great career. You can make money doing that, make a good living doing that, but I started to shift with the advice of some friends and from reading this book to consulting, which was more of these businesses have a problem and they don't care how it gets done, they just need it solved. And so I realized that I was an engineer that had the ability to, I had social skills to a certain degree, where I was able to talk to these people, figure out what their problems were, figure out what the products they were that they wanted to create, and then just kind of go from that fuzzy description to an actual working thing. And that translation was the real value. The programming piece is, relatively commoditized. Like, I can hire a Rails developer for, $30 an hour out of some other country, and they can do a decent job. But the things that they might struggle on, or the things that might be difficult, is the communication aspect of it, the synthesizing like this fuzzy, weird idea into something concrete. That's something that it's transforming a vision into a product,
right?
Transforming this idea and this all of these different, like, I don't know, these are passion projects for a lot of people that I was working with, into something that they could actually show investors, something that they could put into customers' hands and see if they liked it. That was where the real value was. And the fact that I could do both, that was where my value came from. That I could synthesize or translate the vision into a product, and then I can actually build that product.
So as opposed to kind of like going on Fiverr or something like that and hiring a Rails developer where they're just like, they need a product manager and they need to say like, write this function that does this thing, write this function that does this thing. You were able to go and talk to someone who had a passion, who says, I want to make a website for dog shorts. And you'd be like, I got you. Like, what's the size of dogs? Like, how do I make this into a reality?
Yeah. At a high level, sure.
Take a picture of your dog and then AR some shorts onto it.
Yeah. Oh boy, the AR stuff's hard, but yeah, no, it was less so like just websites. That's what I started out with, and more so applications and systems that were a little bit more complicated. And yeah, so that's where a lot of that's where the kind of the competitive edge of my consulting firm came from, is the ability to do that.
So you think it's like really important for people to be able to define their competitive edge, and hopefully in a way that they can be consultants as well.
In freelancing, yeah, because you have to differentiate yourself from just a Rails developer, just a JavaScript developer. And I don't mean to say just an X here, but what I mean to say is those are fields that are getting more and more commoditized as more and more people are learning how to do them. The tools are getting easier. It's more accessible. So when you're building a business, you have to, and fuck if I know how to build a successful business, but this is the one time I guess I was able to. But you have to kind of build a moat around your business that is like differentiates you from someone else. So if anyone can enter your castle, your like business castle, then it's not that safe of a place for you to build this kind of revenue generating machine on top of. But if you have this moat around it, this defense, this competitive edge, then that can make it so it's a little bit harder for someone to jump in and start competing with you, which makes it so you become kind of a monopoly, and therefore you can raise your prices. That was a big mental train that I just went through. Hopefully that made somewhat of sense.
Yeah, totally.
But you want to be able to differentiate yourself from anybody else that's a Rails developer or that's any sort of freelancer. And this applies to designers, this applies to copywriters, whatever. There needs to be something unique about you, and that will allow you to start raising your prices more and more.
Right.
Getting
kind
more
of like building that. Like, I like the analogy of a moat because it makes a lot of sense from a physical perspective of like, I'm keeping things in and I'm keeping the outside out in terms of like, this is the value that I provide. Yeah, competitors.
Yeah, it's like, do you want to be a common commodity? Like, do you want to be selling corn on a market, or do you want to be selling products derived from corn that are really hard to duplicate? One of those is more profitable than the other.
Did you find that when you were doing this like kind of like freelancing consulting, when you switched over consulting, that like you were saying about these threads of happiness, I kind of want to tie that back in a little bit.
Sure.
That it was like something that allowed you to have that kind of freedom, because like I think a lot of people are sold on the idea of, okay, so I'm going to quit my 9-to-5 job and then I'm going to have all my time back, and with my time I'm going to travel to Bali and like work out of a remote year thing, what I mean? So like, is there anything that you found to be true or false in that statement and in that kind of like lifestyle?
Well, so I didn't really do freelancing. Okay, I like the part of freelancing where I was kind of my own boss. I could set my own schedule. I could work remotely. That was the huge thing. And when I started freelancing, I really wanted to start traveling. I wanted to start seeing more of the world. I had done one semester abroad in Spain, and came back one of those like shitty students that like has the lisp and everything, speaking in Spanish.
I don't remember that.
It's the worst.
I remember that.
Yeah. So, but that one experience made me want to be like, all of a sudden I want to see everything else. Like they're like, okay, cool, I saw Spain, but wait, there's this whole other world out there that is way more interesting than where I grew up, which is upstate New York, and where we went to school. That I need a taste of. I need to see this. And so freelancing was less so, like although I did enjoy the projects I was working on, it was more so this thing that enabled me to go and explore this other passion at the time, which was seeing the world. I mean, just seeing other places. And I could keep doing that because I had a sustainable career going on at the same time. I could work remotely from all these different places that I was going to. So it was really kind of a means to accomplish that thread or start following that thread of happiness, which was traveling and seeing other cultures and everything. That just all fascinated me.
Do you feel like you grew because of these other cultures? Can you give us some examples of these other cultures and like
sure.
what you've learned?
Yeah. I mean, I speak Spanish now. That was a huge thing. And aside from just studying abroad there, I mean, I lived in Spain for 2 months, just on my own, hanging out there with friends I had made. I went to, I don't know, I just saw parts of the world that, I mean, I went to both Israel and Palestine. That was an interesting trip where you get to see two sides of something that was, I didn't know a lot about that conflict and I wanted to learn more about it, so I just went there. Granted, reading will teach you more probably than, reading and going there will teach you a lot, but that was really fascinating. I went to China and got to see the Great Firewall firsthand, which is something that as a kid I was always like fascinated with, like how can this government control the internet? How does that even work? And so I got to go there and just play with it, but more importantly, see the Great Wall of China. Like that thing is just crazy. Like it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's huge.
I got to learn.
I haven't seen it, but
it's huge. It's a big thing. It's a big wall. It's incredible. You should go there. I got to see the European Union as a whole, which I love the European project, and it fascinates me to see like all of these different cultures coming together and mixing into one. Not mixing into one, but becoming more united together. Alas, that stopped to a certain degree in 2016, but just being able to talk to people, like average people that are in these places, these random places that I was in, was just fascinating. Talking to some Moroccan dude about the king of Morocco and how fucked up he is. Like those conversations were just fascinating, and that shaped me.
Right, all while being able to get paid, which is like a thing that a lot of people want. Is they want that freedom, but also kind of like the we're all into kind of like how can we have both? You know what I mean? And pros and cons and everything like that.
And there are cons to that lifestyle. Honestly, it gets lonely after a while. I kind of broke down last year while in Argentina. I was going to live in Buenos Aires for a couple months. And continue trying to learn Spanish and everything. But then 2 weeks in, the friend that was supposed to be with me ended up not being able to show up. So it was just me alone in Buenos Aires. I didn't know anybody there. And I went out and started to try to meet people. But at that point, I've been traveling for like 2 years, on and off, obviously. But you get kind of tired of these ephemeral relationships where you meet these people and you hang out with them for a month and you get really close to them and then they go away. Or they don't go away, but you go away, and then it's really hard to see them again. And you have all these friends in all these different places, and you can't revisit all these different places all the time. And I don't know, it got lonely and isolating, and so I like kind of broke down in Buenos Aires and came back to New York, and have been relatively stable since then in terms of traveling, like staying in the same place.
And do you like kind of like being quote unquote home, or like feeling like you're back with like the longer term relationships? Was that something that you're glad to experience the other side of, but then you're just kind of like, oh, I need this kind of like somewhat level of stability? Yeah,
I think I got a lot of it out of my system in those couple of years with freelancing, and that's why I went to also what drove me to get a full-time job again. Granted, it was a remote job, and we were traveling a lot for that, but I like being grounded to a certain degree. But the grass is always greener. There are certainly times where I'm like, hey, I could go live in Spain again. It'd be a lot cheaper. Ooh, I could speak Spanish again. That sounds fun. It's in like thinking about, and like I get really frustrated by by the way the like U.S. works a lot of the times, and so the idea of just like kind of running away to Europe and living a nice life in Madrid or whatever, even though that's not what it would be if I were to actually do that, is always a lure. But yeah.
Do you feel like people graduate out of college and all of a sudden there's all these paths that are opened up to a lot of people? It's very linear through. Some people are able to stick linear through grad school and PhD, and like kind of like given the fact that you've done consulting and that you've had the full-time jobs and stuff like that, and not saying that you're like a 75-year-old man who's dispatching wisdom upon the 22-year-old.
No, I'm 25 and don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
But like if you could go back, rewind the clock like a 3-year, 4-year period, would you still do the path that you did? Would you tell yourself like put more effort into consulting, or put more effort into like starting your own business and being an entrepreneur, or put more effort into kind of like 9 to 5 and solid relationships? Like, what do you think has helped you the most, kind of like seeing all these different things?
I mean, I don't have any regrets over the stuff that I've done over the last few years. I think I did it well, or I think I did it. I'm happy where I've ended up based on those experiences. Obviously, like there were fuck ups I made and everything within that time span, but those are the mistakes that lead you to where you are today, and I'm relatively happy with where I am today. I don't know. I mean, I think it was what I hesitate to find something that is like particularly like, wow, you really should have done this, or you really should have explored this path. I don't regret quitting my job after 8 months. I don't regret going full time in the company that I went full time with, or the blockchain stuff. As much as I don't like blockchains now, I don't think they're particularly useful, and I don't think cryptocurrencies are particularly useful or interesting. I just don't regret the time I spent at that company either way, because I still learned a ton from the people that I was learning from. I don't know. I mean, I guess my general, at the ripe old age of 25, advice is just follow paths of happiness. Like, we're still super young, so if you make a mistake now, it's not like you have a wife and kids and everything that you need that are relying on your income. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any regrets on that front. I think experimenting around like that, like you said, there's all these different paths, and the search cost to go amongst all of them is pretty high, but I think it's a worthwhile one.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's worth it to make some sacrifices in terms of how much money you have, or how much money you're making, your career advancements. I think, for me at least, it was worth making some sacrifices along that front to do the things that I did. Because the freelancing that I did while I was living in Spain, I was only working 20 hours a week. Had I worked 40 hours a week, maybe I would have been a better programmer or a better business person, or maybe my side business now would have more customers and I would be able to live off of it. I don't know. I'll never be able to know, but I don't regret making that decision to instead hang out with friends in Spain and like just kind of derp around this city that was interesting to me. Like, it was fun at the time. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
No, that's perfect. Again, because like that's similar in the vein to kind of like we were doing the happiness threads thing. It's like one of those things that can be surmised in a sentence, but it's infinitely deep because there's infinite options. It's like regret. You know what I mean? It's one word, but there's interesting things, interesting literature out there that talks about minimizing regret, and kind of like you were saying, like take the chance to kind of like make those search costs, take the risk. I suppose take the leap, because most of the time you'll get stung, but you'll learn something completely new.
Yeah, and I guess I always found regret, and maybe it's because I've just gotten lucky enough to be in the position that I'm in, but the reason I haven't regretted anything is I just kind of look at it differently, whereas I've made mistakes that some people might say they would have regretted doing, but you learn from those, and I always just take it as a learning experience, and I think that's pretty a cliche thing to say, and that's nothing new, but easier said than done. But I just try to take stupid mistakes and fuck-ups and bad decisions as like, okay, well, that was a shitty mistake. That was a bad way to do it, but hopefully I won't do it again.
Right.
I also write things down a lot. So I have a diary. I have like a personal wiki that I keep track of all the things that I've done.
Personal wiki, interesting. What is that hosted on?
I've used a lot of different things over the years. I've had it since 2012, so about 7 years now. And it started out with something called VimWiki, which is, there's this text editor called Vim, and you could embed a wiki within it.
Interesting.
Think about like if you had Word, but if you could click on the links and create other Word pages and create essentially your own Wikipedia with Word. It's the same thing. Recently I switched, I tried a bunch of different tools over the years. Recently I switched to something called Notion, which I think is a pretty solid product. I pay for it now because I always had this dream of building my own wiki that did exactly what I wanted it to do. It was fully encrypted. It had all these features that made it easy to navigate, but alas, no time for something like that. That's just it's hard to find time.
Project.
Yeah, it's a big project, and I have a bunch of friends that have gone down that rabbit hole, and none of them ever find the kind of wiki bliss that they're looking for. So I use something called Notion now, and I keep track of all sorts of stuff in it. Like I have a database, so they allow you to keep kind of databases within this wiki. So I have a database of recipes that I cook on a weekly basis. I have a database of just project ideas and business ideas that I've come up with over the years. And like, it's helpful because when you have an idea and it pops into your head, you can jot it down and write stuff down, and then it kind of dies out and you stop thinking about it for a while, and then it comes back, and then you don't want to be at square one again, where you're just thinking about the same stupid things that you thought about the first time you thought about or came up with that idea. So this is really helpful to kind of organize your thoughts in a way that when you pick up an idea again, you can kind of take it off the shelf and look at the thoughts and the process that you had the first time you had the idea. And that just saves you a whole bunch of time. So if you think about this whole business idea, and then at the end you're like, oh no, this is stupid because of X. And then years later, you forget about all the different reasons why that business idea was stupid. Instead, you can go look at some wiki article.
Your wiki that you have about it. Exactly. I have a question about this. So I use Notion as well. I love Notion. One of my big problems with Notion is that the mobile and iPad apps have a lot to be desired.
Sure.
In the sense of like when you're editing things and you want to like move back a line because they're stored as blocks, so like each thing is its own thing. So you have to kind of like move up the blocks to edit text, and sometimes the offline doesn't work as well as it should.
Yeah, there's a lot to be desired.
So what I've been doing is I've been like writing on my notes app on my iPhone and iPad and then importing that into Notion, but I'm wondering if you have a better workflow.
Yeah, I just use the mobile app because I used to do that because VinWiki, my previous wiki solution there was no mobile app whatsoever. There's just no option to use it. Or there's nothing available for it. So I would write something in the Notes app and then I would import it in later. But I found that I wasn't very efficient in doing that. Like I would generally just forget about things for like months, and then months later be like, oh wow, this is a note in here that I should transfer into my wiki. And I just never ended up, or I would do it then, but it would, it's all that time that it could have been in its nice little place. So I just use the mobile app. I suck it up. I know it sucks. I'm hoping they'll fix it eventually. They have a lot of money. They're getting a lot of popularity. So I have a feeling that they'll improve things. But it's also like Notion's one of those apps like Slack where it's actually just a web browser that is embedded in your like as a desktop app or disguised as a desktop app. So they're generally like not that well implemented, or there's just limitations with doing things like that or making apps that way. And they're doing the same thing on mobile. Like it's a React Native app, or I'm pretty confident that it's a React Native app, or something along those lines. I don't know. And it shows in the app, like it doesn't feel like a native iOS app. It kind of feels like a web browser that's slammed into an iOS app. A lot of companies do that because it just saves a lot on costs. I did too during my consulting days, and would do it again just because it saves so much money.
Right.
So it's the incentive model.
iOS development is just much more complex than React Native development.
It is, and I've done native iOS development before. I actually run an app on my phone that I wrote. It's built in like native iOS or Swift that keeps track of my location over time. Because I don't want, like, you can do it with Google. Google Maps will track you over time, but I hate Google. I don't trust them very much. So I built my own because I still wanted the information of like where I had been. I went on a long walk through these random places in Paris, and it's a fun memory and walk, and I don't have any memory, or I don't have the ability to like trace that on my own in my brain. So instead, I wrote this app that just pings my location to a personal server every so often, and so I have this kind of trail of where I've been over time. But that's using native Swift, and that was outrageously complicated to build.
Really?
Just for that, such a simple thing. It was just, maybe it's just because I'm not experienced in it, but or that's probably why. But yeah, native development's tough.
Yeah, and I mean, we could completely just geek out over tech and stuff like that, but I don't necessarily know how much value we could extract from that. One thing I do want to add, though, is that you definitely, of people who I've engineered with in the past and done computer science-y things with and programming in general, you definitely are able to take ideas and bring them into reality a lot more than most of us, where you're like, you have an idea like this, where you're like, I just want to know where I walked, or I want to be able to have my friends play music and like have us all share the same music. How do you take these ideas and bring them into reality so quickly, and like what like kind of drives you to do that?
It's just like getting really experienced with the tools that you have, right? And trying to like basically create these exponential gains in productivity by increasing your ability in a given tool set. So I got really good at one specific set of technical tools, and because of that, because they're pretty versatile, I was able to build all these different apps pretty quickly. Like that music sharing app that I told you about that's built using the exact same framework that I was using during my consulting days, and because I was doing it all the time, you just get really quick at it.
Could you, for a lot of people who are just getting into programming and consulting, could you say like your tech stack in terms of
it's React, it's React and Redux on the front end, it is Rails and Postgres on the back end, and then for mobile apps it's React Native. Pretty straightforward, super boring. I like choosing really boring tech tools because the latest stuff, if you use like the bleeding edge tools, and I'm sure this is true of whatever industry, they're a lot of fun and you learn a lot and they're cool and it's fun to experiment with, but if you're actually building something that you want just to work, it's better to go with the tried and tested boring things. Like Postgres is a really boring database.
So boring.
It's just boring. It's not these, high-tech new NoSQL, whatever buzzword databases.
Firebase.
Yeah, Fire, whatever. It's not any of that, and that's intentional. I want a nice technical manual that is very predictable, that I can easily read. I want a lot of people that have, beaten it to death and found its quirks, so that when I find those quirks, I'm not the first one doing it, and I don't have to trudge around to try to figure out how to fix this. So using really boring tools is also an advantage that I think I've had. But I've also been programming since I was 11, and I think, and when I was 11, I was doing the exact same thing. So I think it's also just 14 years of just messing around with tools like these.
It makes you an expert.
Yeah, I mean, eventually if you just banging your face against the keyboard long enough, eventually you're gonna write something cool. Maybe not if you're just straight up banging your face against the keyboard.
I mean, I've done that. I just end up with a concussion.
I do too, especially when I get mad at the computer. It's just slam your head on the table. Fuck. But yeah, no, I think it's also just, what's the 10,000 hours thing?
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, okay. Get your 10,000 hours in a certain trail or certain field, and that's how you become an expert in it. I don't know that I've done 10,000 hours, but I've done a lot of them.
Right.
Just sitting in front of a computer programming.
So I guess to bring it to learning in general, what's your kind of go-to path? Do you kind of see everything as a term of a system or a program, and then you kind of approach it from there? Or are you just kind of say, for example, that you want to pick up windsurfing? What do you do?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I think learning that probably depends on each individual person. For me, when I first started out, I would just read a bunch of tutorials, and then most importantly, I would actually just try to build something. I would just, fuck it, go for it. If I fail at building it doesn't work, then okay, then I learned how to do it, and I drop it, and I have that experience now. So for me, I'm a hands-on learner. I need to just start playing with things and start tinkering with it and seeing if I can get it to work. But for other things, I've recently found myself reading books more. I occasionally read books growing up, but for some reason in the last year specifically, and I think it was this past job, I had a manager that was really encouraging of go buy whatever book you want and read it. We just have unlimited budget for buying books. That brought me into the world of, especially now that I don't have college to teach me things, of I want to continue my education as an adult, and how do I do that? Books are a very cost-efficient way of doing so. I found myself, I didn't read so many technical books, I guess a couple, but I read a lot of business books. Now I'm reading a lot of books about history and politics. I'm reading The Power Broker, which is a 1,300-page book about how New York looks the way it does right now.
Wow.
Big book.
It's a big book. It's a big boy book.
Big boy book. But yeah, so reading has been a big thing for me now. But yeah, when I'm programming or learning whatever, it's hands-on was generally the way. It's a way for me personally to learn things. It's just start poking at it and seeing if you can get some experience.
Right, just open it up and just see what you can find out.
Yeah, just tinker with it.
So, do you have any books that you recommend? What's the kind of a go-to book that you think has really kind of influenced? People always have the top 4 books or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
The most difference on their life.
I think it depends on which facet of which topic. I mean, if you're trying to do consulting, Getting Started in Consulting by Alan Weiss was great for me. It's basically this old dude. I think it was written in the 80s or 90s, so it was, it's not as relevant. Or it seems like it's not relevant to a programmer getting started in freelancing, but it actually really is. There are some ridiculous pieces of advice go get a fax machine because you need a fax machine that I literally just underlined it in the book and said lol. I'm not gonna get a fax machine, but there's some really good tidbits.
You should have. It would have 10x'd your business.
Maybe it would have. Maybe that was the thing. And if I was running this business in Japan, apparently it would have.
Really?
Because Japan apparently just runs on fax machines.
Really?
Yeah.
In 2019?
To this day. At least when I was there in 2017, everywhere there's fax machines.
That's wild.
And people use them. Yeah, super wild. But that country's amazing. That's a whole different can of worms. But yeah, no. So getting started in consulting is a great one if you want to get into freelancing. I don't know. A lot of the books that I've been reading lately have been on history and politics. So I really liked. This was a recommendation from a friend called "The Confessions of an Economic Hitman," which talks a lot about how the United States kind of enacted this economic force on the world and was able to, become a very, very the superpower that it was in the 80s, 90s, and everything. So that was a super interesting book. I'm reading The Power Broker right now because I really want to understand how political systems work. I think that, and this is a book about someone who, literally just mastered the political systems of New York and kind of the United States as well. His name's Robert Moses. Mm-hmm. So I'm learning a lot about that. In terms of my career, for business books, The Innovator's Dilemma is always a good one that people go for. It talks about how companies, basically how these like disruptive startups form and like the economics that make them able to, like how did Slack all of a sudden become this huge thing? How did Zoom unseat WebEx and Google Hangouts? Where did Zoom come from? In the last like 2 or 3 years, it's just like exponential growth. So it's like, how does that happen? This book talks all about that. So if you're really into the startup world, that is, it's a good one. Another good book, I guess this is the last one that I really liked about personal finance, is called Your Money or Your Life. I don't remember the author off the top of my head, but it talks about how to achieve financial independence such that you are working for yourself and the things that you're interested in rather than working for a living, which I really liked. So rather than working this 9-to-5 grind, you could instead somehow figure out a way to be financially independent such that you can go volunteer with your 9-to-5 time and work on a cause that you think is interesting and good for your community, which is a personal goal of mine. So that's another great.
How does one kind of? I think financial independence is such a hot topic too, because we've reached this internet age where everybody is just like, oh heck, like I don't want to work in a factory for 65 years like my grandparents did. I don't I don't want that lifestyle. I want to be able to provide like the freedom of a FIRE lifestyle.
Yeah.
What have you kind of like learned from this book and been able to implement into your own life?
So the big thing about the book is so it talks about reducing your expenses is a huge part of it. And so I'm pretty strong about trying to reduce my expenses as much as I can. I have a budgeting app that I use called You Need a Budget that I'm pretty strict with to make sure that I'm living below my means. That was also a big thing that they talk about. The big thing is generating passive income, which this book talks about doing it through, I think they do it through bonds, which probably you're not probably able to do that in 2019, but this book was written in like the 80s or 70s or 80s. It's still very relevant today though, but the big thing is generating passive income, like basically decoupling your time from your income. That's the big thing. And again, this is nothing new to like the FIRE movement or financial independence, but the way it's impacted me is that I've been really trying, I have these side businesses that I run that are software as a service companies that generate a modest amount of revenue per month for me. It's nothing that I can live off of yet, but my goal is to, in my spare time, to keep working on these. And it appears that they have a market that we can sell to and start growing them. And eventually, if I can switch off of working a full-time job into just kind of maintaining these software as a service companies, that would be amazing. So that's the way I've implemented it, is starting these side businesses with a co-founder of mine and trying to grow them. Not successfully, to the most part. We have one client on each of the companies that we started, but it's a fun side project, and maybe one day it'll go somewhere, maybe it won't, and I'll spin it down and try something new, but it's a fun thing to mess around with.
Right, and it kind of like gets you closer to that goal, like you were saying, of like trying building up multiple revenue streams to give yourself the freedom to be able to leave revenue streams without feeling like, oh no, I just shot myself in the foot.
Yeah, the most primary one being a full-time job. And that's the one that most people get their revenue stream from. I would love to decouple myself from working a full-time job. Unless the full-time job that I'm working on I think is really impactful or is something that, I really want to be working on either climate change or getting cars off the streets. Those are my two pretty big passions. If I'm working in either of those two fields, then I'm happy to work a 9-to-5 job and also do the stuff on the side too, but I can have fun.
How do you feel about kind of like cars on the street and climate change in general? Like, you said this is a passion of yours, but like, what's your kind of like end goal? What do you see in this?
So I was in Syracuse this past weekend visiting my parents, and getting from New York City to Syracuse. Syracuse is a city in upstate New York. It's about maybe 4.5 hours driving. On the bus, it's 6 hours, and the bus is terrible. All of them are terrible. This particular one, the bathroom was broken, so the entire bus just smelled like piss.
Oh no!
And that's happened to me multiple times. Yeah. Every time I take the bus upstate.
That's actually a pretty tame bus compared to most
buses. Yeah. You get people screaming all the time, and like most of the time, people are fine. They're not really much the problem. It's just like the bus itself sucks, and it's just uncomfortable. It's long. You stop in this like horrible gas station in the middle of Pennsylvania where there's like fast food or like packaged. It's like Apple product. It's like an apple that looks like an apple, but in reality, it probably has high fructose corn syrup in it or whatever. So that's like the only food you can get along the journey. Anyways, what I'm getting at is getting around in the United States sucks ass. It's terrible. And, we live in New York, and New York is one of the few places where we have public transportation, where we have trains, and if you don't have a car, it's not the end of the world in New York. You can get around very well. There are very few other places in the United States where I can make that same statement. And that frustrates me a lot. Going up to Syracuse, when I get there, I can't do anything. My parents live in the suburbs. I don't have a car, so I just sit at home all day. And my parents know that, and they're frustrated by it too. I think me ranting to them about this stuff has also kind of gotten them on board with it as well. But the end game that I would love to see is more transportation options in the United States than just cars, which is why I'm reading The Power Broker, actually, is this whole car-based society was designed by Robert Moses. He was the pioneer, or one of the pioneers of it, and I want to learn more about how he did it. You got to know your enemy.
Because it's relatively new too. I mean, in the 1800s, everything was by rail.
Brooklyn was covered in trolleys, and they got dismantled sometime in the 1900s or maybe it was the 1800s. I don't remember. They got dismantled through pressure in the oil industry and got replaced by buses. Utica, New York, this just random. If you go there now, it's completely decrepit city. My grandmother lives there, so I still go there from time to time, and this city used to have trolleys too, but now it's just a wasteland. I mean, it's just a bunch of highways that segregate the city into poor and rich, and make it impossible to do anything unless you have a car. Americans are slaves to cars, and I want to change that, or I would like to be able to change that. Granted, I'm young and naive and 25 and think that I can change it, and maybe I won't be able to, but maybe I'll be able to do a little bit of the work that is necessary to get high-speed rail infrastructure in New York. I can already see myself 10 years from now watching or listening to this podcast just dying hysterically at how stupid that idea, or how naive the thought of being able to work on that is. But
no, I mean, literally people like Elon Musk are powered by those ideas of what if we could just have naivete and just kind of make something that sounds fictional real.
Yeah, and Elon Musk has billions of dollars that I don't have.
That's true.
I would need Jeff Bezos levels of money to be able to pull something like this off, and also just way more knowledge than I have right now. But so that's why I'm super interested in programming and everything, but I'm also interested in politics. I see politics as a system that's actually way more complicated than computer systems, because it involves people and relationships and money and economics, and all of these things together just are so hard to navigate and manipulate to get things done. It's a way more complicated and interesting technical system that I want to start trying to tackle. So that's kind of been where my head's been at for the last, maybe a few months at least to a year.
Right. That's interesting. And I really hope that does succeed too, because I think, in a way, I have mixed feelings about public transport myself. There'll be some times where I'm there's so many, it's all crowded, and, it's down. And, for example, a few days ago here in New York City was one of the hottest days that we had on record here in July 2019, and half the trains were down in the stations, and people were just
trapped. They're just rotting.
You're
rotting in there.
So that's a problem. But at the same time, with cars filling up the overground, there's a lot less ways for buses and public transport to exist in the first place. So I think it's kind of a multi-tiered problem.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Americans don't like the idea of public transportation because they've just never seen it done well. And I swear it's out there. That's another thing traveling taught me, is that, oh my God, we're just so bad at infrastructure in this country. We're just terrible at it. It's just genuinely bad. You go to, even Madrid just has a phenomenal train network, metro system. It's clean, it's not crowded, it runs on time. You go to a place like Singapore and it's just, you could lick the ground and it's
really?
you'd probably be healthier after licking it.
And good vitamins in it.
Yeah, you go to Shanghai or Beijing and their public transportation is just, it's incredible. China's building high-speed rail networks all over the country. Granted, they're not a democratic country, so it's a lot easier to do things like that, but it's just amazing, the experience of being on a high-speed train in China. It's just so comfortable and pleasant, and granted, I had the privilege of also being able to try first class for one of my legs on it, which was also super fun, but I just don't have that opportunity, or that ability to go to Syracuse, New York on any sort of comfortable means of transit, or reasonably priced means of transit.
Right.
It's frustrating. So I don't know, I think as one of the wealthiest countries in the world, if not the wealthiest country in the world, we can do better. We can do so much better, but we don't. And that frustrates me. And I want to figure out why, and if it's possible to change that. And I have a friend of mine that thinks a lot about this as well. He is super passionate about cycling and transportation, and I gave him the idea, and I think he's sort of running away with it, of building a parklet in Philadelphia.
A what?
A parklet.
What is that?
It's basically, we're both really frustrated by the fact that drivers get free parking on streets. And so what we want to do is build a sort of platform, a miniature park that fits in the space of a parking spot. And then we tow it out with bicycles, set it up, and then there's a mini park that anyone can use. This has been done a bunch of times in San Francisco. It's been done I've seen one in New York, but they're amazing. There are these great little public spaces that, again, it's just the size of a parking spot, that you'd be surprised at how much it transforms the streetscape and makes it a more pleasant place to be.
So you tear a parking spot into a park?
You put a mobile park on top of the parking spot, yeah.
A mobile park on top, but isn't that just like, I guess it's like 10 by 6. So it's
it's small.
Yeah.
And you'd be shocked. I mean, you can put a bunch of chairs on it, you can put free plants on it, and people will go to them. I mean, if you go to San Francisco, you'll find them. The best place to put them is, I think, I haven't done too much research, is outside of restaurants. So that way the people in the restaurant can go grab some food and then go out and just hang out in this little parklet and eat outside.
That is awesome.
It's a mini
something
plaza.
I've never seen as well in my life.
Yeah, so hopefully my friend Bill will go ahead and build that. I don't know that he's a mechanical engineer, so he has capabilities of doing that. He also, I'm going to plug his thing called the Philly Moon Men. They do this amazing thing where they go out into streets and show people the moon with telescopes. So everyone should Google Philly Moon Men as well.
PhillyMoonmen.com or just Philly Moon Men?
I don't remember. Google it and you'll find it though.
Okay, Philly Moon Men.
It's pretty zany and fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for being on the show today and teaching us all about your lifestyle and different choices and stuff like that, man. You really are, quite motivated and an inspiration to my own, in a way, like coming up in computer science and feeling like I wasn't really going to succeed in that path. You definitely helped put me on the right path in that. So thank you for that.